If you scroll through social media on like any given weekend here in Hong Kong, you are bound to see pictures of Tung Ping Chau.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like it's this gorgeous northeasternmost offshore island, and people treat it like this, idyllic, slightly remote geological park.
Yeah, just a quiet weekend getaway.
Exactly. You take the long ferry ride out, you marvel at these incredibly flat, 55-million-year-old sedimentary rocks. You take some selfies and you go home. It feels perfectly preserved. Almost sleepy, I guess.
It really does present itself as a beautifully static piece of nature.
Yeah.
Just a place where nothing much happens.
But our goal today is to kind of dig past that topsoil of weekend tourism and hit the actual bedrock of what this place really is. Because after diving into our source material for this deep dive, which is a completely fascinating document called the Historical Research Report on Tung Ping Chau, well, frankly, I'm blown away.
It's an intense read for sure.
I mean, this island is not just a collection of pretty rocks. It has been a brutal battleground. It was a haven for literally tens of thousands of pirates and a high-stakes geopolitical crossroads.
The history there is incredibly dense. And our mission today is to pull apart this wild, layered human history. We're going to point out specific physical clues that you can actually look for the next time you visit.
Things hiding right in plain sight.
Exactly. Things hiding in plain sight that tell a massive story. And ultimately, we're looking at what this one tiny island teaches us about extreme human survival. The core theme we'll be exploring is what historians call frontier transformation.
Frontier transformation?
Right. Basically, Tung Ping Chau is a place that has been constantly wiped clean and reshaped by these massive, violent historical waves.
And to really understand the island as it exists today, we have to start with a moment when it was violently erased from the map entirely. So, okay, let's unpack this. I was looking at the timeline in the research report, and there is a massive 8-year blank spot starting in 1661.
Yeah, a literal blank spot.
What exactly caused an entire island community to just vanish?
Well, that blank spot is the result of the Qing dynasty issuing something called the Evacuation Edict. At the time, the empire was trying to starve out a massive naval threat.
A warlord, right?
Yeah, a Ming loyalist warlord named Koxinga. He was operating out of Taiwan and using the entire southern coastline of China to supply his fleets. So the Qing Empire decided on this staggering scorched earth strategy.
It's total destruction.
Yeah, they essentially concluded that if they couldn't control the coast, absolutely no one could. So they drew a boundary line far inland, creating a colossal coastal dead zone. And Tung Ping Chau was unfortunately left completely on the wrong side of that line.
But how do you actually execute an edict like that across thousands of miles of coastline? I mean, do you just send out an eviction notice?
It was much more brutal than that. The islanders, who were mostly local fishermen and farmers, were given just 3 days to leave everything behind.
3 days.
Just 3 days. And after that window, heavily armed imperial troops swept through the coast and the offshore islands. They burned every village, smashed every grain silo, and set fire to every single boat they could find.
That is insane.
They destroyed the entire infrastructure of survival so that Koxinga's forces would find nothing but ash. So for 8 years, Tung Ping Chau was a dead zone. If you tried to sneak back to fish or harvest your old crops, the penalty was immediate execution.
Which is just mind-boggling to think about. It's the equivalent of hitting a brutal, unyielding factory reset on an entire society. So when the ban finally lifts in 1669 and people are allowed back, my question is, how do you rebuild a community from literal ashes when you have zero resources and the empire barely acknowledges you exist?
You rebuild with whoever is desperate enough to take the risk.
Right.
The original locals, they were known as the Punti population, which essentially means the native soil inhabitants. They were either dead from the harsh inland relocation or they had established new lives and just flat out refused to return to a former death zone.
Makes sense. I wouldn't go back either.
Exactly. So the Kham government actively recruited immigrants from other provinces to fill the void. These were the Hakka people, which translates to guest families. The Hakka were known for migrating and settling in tough, mountainous, or barren terrains.
They were survivors.
Very much so. These newcomers are the ones who built the 5 main villages we still see ruins of today on the island, like Chau Mei and Taitong. They arrived to scorched earth and had to make do with whatever the island naturally provided.
And this leads to our first historical footprint for you to look out for. If you walk through Chau Mei village today, you will see these rough, jagged shale foundations.
Yeah, those are incredible.
Right. Most tourists walk right past them, assuming they're just natural rock formations or like crude piles. But they aren't. They are desperate survival architecture. These 1669 Hakka immigrants had no timber left because it was all burned, so they used the island's famous sedimentary rock just to get a roof over their heads.
That's a perfect example of how the landscape dictates survival. And another crucial artifact from this era is sitting right inside the Amawan Tin Hau Temple. There's an ancient bell inside, dated 1765.
Oh, yeah?
People look at it as a beautiful religious artifact, but in the context of a frontier trying to rebuild, it served a vastly different function. What's fascinating here is that in rural coastal communities of that era, the temple was the center of civil administration.
It wasn't just for prayer.
No, having an officially dated cast iron bell was essentially a political license. It proved to any passing imperial patrols that these villagers had finally regained the empire's official permission to exist, to fish, to be a recognized community again.
Wow.
Yeah, this factory reset we're talking about was a massive demographic experiment by the Qing Empire, and it permanently reshaped the regional map into a complex mix of Hakka and local Punti populations.
So the empire repopulates the island, stamps their paperwork with this bell, and then what? Do they leave a garrison to protect these new settlers?
Not at all. They completely abandoned them. By the late 18th and early 19th century, the Qing Navy was disastrously ineffective in these regional waters. They created a massive power vacuum.
And nature abhors a vacuum, which I imagine is exactly why the pirates sailed into Mirs Bay.
Precisely. During the Jockeying era, roughly 1796 to 1820, the South China Sea was dominated by a massive pirate coalition. This was led by Zheng Yi and his brilliant, formidable wife, Zheng Yi Sao, also known as Shi Yang.
A legendary figure.
Oh, absolutely. We are talking about a highly organized armada of over 70,000 members, and Tung Ping Chau sits right in the middle of Mirs Bay, which was a strategic choke point for maritime trade. Since the Qing Navy rarely patrolled there, the island was highly vulnerable to kidnapping, raids, and extortion.
So what does this all mean? It means Tung Ping Chau basically became a frontier town, but floating in the ocean, like an oceanic mafia protection racket. But I have to challenge the traditional narrative here. We always hear these historical accounts of poor, defenseless peasants being terrorized by pirate armadas. Were these islanders really just helpless victims?
That is the fascinating twist in the research. They were not helpless victims at all. They were incredibly savvy survivalists. They realized very quickly that they couldn't rely on the state, so they built their own localized defense and diplomacy.
They took matters into their own hands.
Yeah, historians refer to this as the fragmentation of maritime defense. Because they had to self-govern, the islanders formed semi-militarized communities, and they realized they had leverage. The island had fresh water, which a massive pirate fleet desperately needs.
Of course.
Yeah, the sources show the villagers were actively negotiating with the Armada, trading their precious fresh water in exchange for the safety of their fishing boats.
They were playing the empire and the pirates against each other. And the physical proof of this hyper-vigilant lifestyle is literally hiding in plain sight for tourists today.
Yes, it is.
You know those massive watchtower sea stacks, Kang Lao Shek, on the easternmost point of the island? We all take photos of those 2 7-meter-tall rock formations, assuming they're just beautiful geology. But the locals explicitly named them watchtowers for a reason. In their culture, the highest point wasn't for sightseeing, it was for scanning the horizon for pirate sails.
It speaks volumes about their psychological landscape. Every high point was a defensive asset, and you see this militarized mindset baked directly into the architecture, too.
Yes. If you explore the old stone houses in Taitong Village, you will notice these narrow, rectangular holes high up on the exterior walls. Tourists always assume, oh, how clever, traditional ventilation for the tropical heat.
Right, but they're not.
No, those are gun loops. They were built specifically so villagers could thrust spears or fire early matchlock firearms down at attackers while remaining behind solid stone. When you look at those walls, you're looking at a fortified bunker.
And understanding that semi-militarized culture is crucial for making sense of the region's later history. When the British eventually leased the new territories decades later in 1898, they were shocked by the fierce, highly organized resistance they faced from local villages.
They caught them completely off guard.
Totally. But if you view it through the lens of Tung Ping Chau's history with the pirates, it makes perfect sense. These communities had spent a century learning how to fight, negotiate, and defend themselves without any help from a central government.
And that exact same tradition, operating off the grid, relying absolutely on local networks rather than state authority, is what made Tung Ping Chau the ultimate clandestine gateway during the massive global conflicts of the 20th century.
Now, when we look at this mid-20th century history, specifically World War II and the Cold War, the sources dive into some highly charged political events involving the Chinese Communist Party, the British Hong Kong government, and various wartime factions.
And just to be clear for you listening, our goal today isn't to endorse or take political sides on these conflicts. We're neutrally reporting the events documented in the research report to see exactly how this specific island was utilized as a physical tool by these different groups. We're just looking at the history.
Exactly. Because the way the island was used is a masterclass in guerrilla geography. Let's start with World War II. In 1941, the Japanese occupy Hong Kong. The Hong Kong Kowloon Independent Brigade, an anti-Japanese guerrilla force, realizes Tung Ping Chau is incredibly valuable.
Because of where it is.
Right, it's close to the mainland, but crucially, it is completely flat.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Why does being flat matter so much for smuggling?
Because if you have a mountainous island, the silhouette of a boat against the cliffs is easy for Japanese patrol boats to spot, even at night. But against a flat shoreline, a small vessel practically vanishes in the dark.
Oh, wow. That's brilliant.
It became a vital secret transit station. Local fishermen who knew every treacherous current and hidden cove from their days of self-governance used the cover of darkness to smuggle intelligence, weapons, and medical supplies. Under the leadership of a figure named Yuan Geng, this localized shadow network successfully evacuated hundreds of cultural elites and democratic figures out of occupied Hong Kong, right under the noses of the Japanese military.
And isn't it incredible that the exact same waters, the exact same treacherous currents meant completely different things depending on the decade? Because if we jump forward to the 1950s through the 1970s, during the Cold War, this wartime supply line becomes a desperate finish line for freedom. Tung Ping Chau was the first point of British Hong Kong jurisdiction for mainland escapees during the massive waves of migration known as the Great Escape.
The physical toll of these escapes was immense. I mean, people were swimming 4 to 6 kilometers across Mears Bay in the pitch black.
That's terrifying.
And they were using whatever they could find to stay afloat. Inflated tractor inner tubes, basketballs, even tying empty thermoses under their arms for buoyancy.
Yay.
And out on the water, a ruthless microeconomy developed. The mainland authorities offered a bounty of 50 RMB, which was a substantial fortune at the time, to fishermen who caught escapees.
Right.
The grim slang for this was catching shrimp dumplings.
Catching shrimp dumplings. It's such a casual phrase for something so terrifying. But then on the island itself, the report shows you had the exact opposite dynamic happening.
Yeah, a total contrast.
The Tung Ping Chau villagers, risking severe legal penalties from the Hong Kong Marine Police, would often offer humanitarian aid. They hid wet, freezing escapees in those same stone bunkers, gave them dry clothes, and showed them how to navigate the hills to avoid the sweeping searchlights.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it proves that Tung Ping Chau was never just a passive backdrop to history. It was a highly active shadow network that bridged completely different geopolitical realities. It really highlights the incredible agency of these everyday fishermen and villagers. They were out there actively deciding who lived, who died, and who made it to safety.
And the physical footprints from this era are some of the most haunting on the island. Take the landmark Lung Lok Shui, which translates to dragon descending into the water.
That's a stunning spot.
It is. It's this spectacular 100-meter-long band of bright white silica rock that cuts straight through the darker shale. Today, it is a geology textbook photo. But during World War II, because that silica rock was so bright, guerrillas and fishermen used it as a crucial geographical landmark. They could navigate their boats silently in the pitch black just by following the white line of the rock without ever having to light a lantern that would give away their position.
And for the Cold War era, you have the Zan Keng Chau Gorge. It's a deep, dramatic, natural corridor cut right through the rock.
Right, if you check social media, it is arguably the most popular fashion shoot location on the island today. But in the 1970s, that narrow, deep trench was the absolute perfect natural hiding spot for exhausted escapees.
It was a lifesaver.
Literally. They would huddle in that gorge to vanish from the sweeping spotlights of the Marine police boats offshore. Even today, if you walk along the beaches of Amal Wan after a strong storm churns up the sand, you might occasionally spot rusted metal thermoses or old corroded tins washing up. Those aren't just ocean trash. They are forgotten physical artifacts of those desperate Cold War swims.
It really forces you to view the landscape through a different lens. But the final chapter of Tung Ping Chau's history brings us to a profound irony.
Yeah, this part is wild.
These islanders survived the king emperors, they survived pirate armadas, they navigated global world wars and the Cold War. But ultimately, it was their own economic boom that emptied the island.
This part of the report is just fascinating. You would think war or famine would be the end of the settlement, but no. In the late 19th and early 20th century, the island is booming. The population swells to around 2,000 people, which is massive for that tiny rock.
It was incredibly crowded.
And it is all because of the lime kiln industry. But how exactly does a lime kiln work? How do you turn a living ecosystem into a booming industry?
It requires immense heat and labor. The villagers realized they could harvest the island's incredibly rich offshore coral reefs. They would drag the coral ashore, build these massive stone ovens, the kilns, and burn the coral for days.
It's burning the reef.
Yeah. The intense heat calcifies the coral, turning it into high-quality construction lime and agricultural fertilizer. It was incredibly lucrative for the village. But the mechanism of this industry required fuel. To keep those massive kilns burning at such high temperatures, they had to chop down almost all the island's native timber for firewood.
Wait, they essentially ate their own island to survive. It is like chopping up your own ship's hull to keep the steam engine running.
That's a great way to put it.
You might go really fast for a while, but eventually you are going to sink.
Yeah.
They deforested their own home, and they were literally excavating and burning the marine ecosystem that surrounded them.
That's a great analogy. They backed themselves into an ecological corner, and then the outside world shifted again. By the 1950s, modern, cheap cement arrives in the region and completely kills the market for traditional coral lime.
Oh, wow.
At the same time, the government starts implementing protections for the remaining coral. Suddenly, the island is ecologically ruined, the primary economy is dead, and without trees to retain the soil, there is barely any fresh water left to attempt traditional farming.
Facing absolute ruin, the villagers utilized that exact same tight-knit, highly organized network they used to survive pirates and smugglers. But this time they use it to leave. They initiate a massive chain migration. By the 1960s, almost the entire population had relocated.
Yep, just gone.
And here is the wildest part. They didn't just move to downtown Hong Kong. They transplanted their entire society across the globe to the United Kingdom, specifically to places like Sutton in London and Liverpool, to work in the booming catering industry. They turned Tung Ping Chau into a ghost island in the span of a single decade.
This raises an important question about identity and resilience. On one level, it is a stark lesson in ecological overreach, but on another, it is a brilliant testament to what we can call transnational village identity. The community of Tung Ping Chau didn't die, it just physically relocated.
They just moved the village to the UK.
Exactly. They maintain their social fabric across oceans. In fact, every single year for the Tom Kung Festival, descendants of these villagers fly back from the UK, cross the globe, and return to this isolated rock to honor their ancestors.
And you can feel the ghosts of that booming industry today. If you go to Tai Tong Wan or Chow Mei, you will find the stone ruins of the old lime kilns. If you step inside and look closely, you can still see the actual scorch marks on the rock from when they were burning the coral day and night. It is a permanent architectural fossil of an industry that consumed itself.
You also have the abandoned village schools, like the Wise Sun School at Chow Tao. The roofs are caved in, the jungle is taking over the playgrounds. But if you peer through the vines, you can still see 1970s educational slogans fading on the peeling walls. It is a very poignant reminder of how quickly a thriving community of 2,000 people can vanish.
It really is. When you take all these stories together, Tung Ping Chau isn't just a park. It is a layered fossil of human resilience. By walking through these historical footprints, the shale foundations built from ashes, the gun loops hiding in plain sight, the gorges used to evade spotlights, the scorch marks of the kilns, you aren't just looking at pretty rocks, you're looking at 300 years of survival scars.
It perfectly proves that history isn't just confined to the pages of research reports. It is written into the physical landscape, etched into the stones, and carried in the memories of people who now live half a world away.
So at the start of this deep dive, we talked about that illusion. The idea of Tung Ping Chau as just a sleepy, perfectly preserved geological playground for weekend selfies. Hopefully that illusion is totally shattered for you now. The next time you see those 55-million-year-old sedimentary layers, you will know exactly how much violent, brilliant, adaptable human drama is stacked right on top of them.
It really changes how you see the place.
Which leaves us with one final, lingering thought for you to chew on long after this deep dive ends. What if the true legacy of an isolated place isn't the physical land it occupies, but the unstoppable adaptive culture it forces its people to develop? When you wander through an overgrown, abandoned village on Tung Ping Chau, are you really looking at a tragic ghost town? Or are you just looking at the discarded cocoon of a community that simply grew wings and conquered the globe?